We will be examining why those with perfect SAT scores and GPAs are rejected by prestigious universities. Many people believe that if they have perfect SAT scores and GPAs, they'll be able to go to a good school, but the reality is a bit different. Today, we'll be examining this reality together. There is a video that has been viral during recent weeks. It concerns the announcement that 75% of those with perfect SAT scores have been rejected by Stanford. After watching this video, many people have started to think that perfect scores are no longer necessary to go to the top colleges. Many people have fallen under the delusion that even if I don't have a good score, I can get into American schools. This is a huge delusion. It is true that there's a problem with this meritocracy perspective. Michael Sandel wrote a book on this subject. We'll be misled if we only focus on the fact that 75% of those with perfect scores have been rejected. Today, we'll be talking about whether it is the end of meritocracy by examining together data released by the universities and discussing in what direction American college admissions will take in the future. First, let's look at these scores. ACT 34 out of 35 and SAT 1510 to 1560. Many people believe that if they have a 34 on the ACTs or 1550 or above on the SATs, they can apply to the top schools. They expect that they can at least be accepted by Cornell or Brown. This is a delusion. Here's data on the mid 50% scores of students accepted into colleges last year. To emphasize it yet again, these scores represent the mid 50%. We know that out of those with 1600 on the SATs, 75% have been rejected. If we examine that a bit more closely, most of the students who were accepted submitted their SAT scores, and the median 50% of students had SAT scores between 1510 and 1560. For ACTs, they had 34 to 35. If we examine data on American college admissions trends, Asians, whether they're international students or Asian Americans, fall in the top 25% rather than the median 50%. Therefore, Asian students in college admissions this year thought, I have a 1490. I can go to Harvard. I can apply to MIT. I can apply to Stanford. Shouldn't I apply to Brown? These people are misled. These people believe that the end of meritocracy implies the fact that Stanford has rejected 75% of those with perfect scores implies that even if they don't have a good SAT score, they can be admitted to the top colleges. This is not true. In terms of the holistic review process, SATs and GPA consists only one part, the academic part. The 75% were rejected by Stanford because they fulfilled only this academic part without satisfying the other criteria in college admissions. The fact that they were rejected doesn't imply that the importance of standardized tests or GPA has decreased. Let's look at these scores again. This data was shared by UPenn. The median 50% of those admitted had ACT scores of 34 to 35 and SAT scores of 1510 to 1560. So let's say that a student watching this webinar has an SAT score of 1530. In that case, they're in the median 50%. The score is 1550. Then they're in the median 50%. The score is 34. Then they're in the median 50% for ACT scores. Let's look at a second source, which is also from an Ivy League. In terms of the applicants accepted to the school, more than 70% had a reading and writing score between 750 and 800. 25% had a score between 700 and 740. So overall, more than 95% had an SAT reading score of higher than 700, and more than 70% had a SAT reading score of higher than 750. So if there are amongst you any students who barely obtained a 710, you will not have a chance at the top schools. For us Asians, we're always in the top 25%. An SAT score of 710 will put you in the lowest 25%. If you have scored below 700, you most certainly will be rejected from the top universities. For math, 87% of students have higher than 750, and 10% of students have 700 to 740. In other words, 97% of students have higher than 700 in math. What I'm saying is not that you will get accepted or rejected if you have a 750, but that with a 750, you are at least at a median score for all students. You will be at least at a median score with the key criteria of the SAT or ACT scores. In the case of the ACTs, 66% of students have between a 35 and a 36. Some people say that with the end of meritocracy, scores are not important and other criteria are more critical, and they're right. What we should ultimately take away is that you can't succeed at college admissions with only scores. So scores are not everything. While this is true, when you look at the data of the students who were accepted, we cannot neglect scores. In particular, with ACTs, 66% had a 35 to 36. So we might say that if a student has a 35, they can get into a really good school. This isn't true. I hope you keep in mind that amongst you who are accepted, 6 out of 10 students or 3 out of 5 students are in the same score range as you. What is interesting is that unlike ACT and SAT scores, the importance of high school ranking has never changed. While this criteria appears to apply only to high school schools that have rankings, when the colleges see an applicant's GPA, they know what percentage of your graduating class you're at. 95% of applicants were in the top 10% of their high school graduating class. If your child is not within the top 10% of their high school graduating class, then they have to compete within the 5% of admitted applicants who are not in the top 10% of their graduating class. In other words, the odds are almost impossible. Honestly, aiming to attend a top 20 college when you're not in the top 10% of your high school is unrealistic. Anyways, colleges state that 95% of admitted students are in the top 10% of their high school graduating class. In terms of the criteria we examined, SATs, ACTs, and school GPA, there have been no changes to the college's admission criteria. So we may say it's the end of meritocracy and say that Stanford has rejected 75% of applicants with perfect scores, but we are not clearly understanding the situation. In today's webinar, we're going to discuss why 75%, 80%, 90% of applicants with perfect scores had to be rejected by the colleges. Afterwards, we'll discuss how students who fulfill the scores required by the colleges should develop other parts of their applications. It's going to be impossible for applicants without the scores required by the colleges to be accepted into Ivy League schools. Being admitted to Johns Hopkins, Carnegie Mellon, and Northwestern will be similarly difficult. So we'll discuss what to do to be admitted to the top 20, top 25, top 30 schools in the case that your scores are insufficient. First, we should keep in mind that while many people say it is difficult for Asians to be accepted into American colleges, that is not necessarily the case. In some ways, it is difficult. In other ways, it is not. Let's examine this together. What we need to keep in mind is that for any college in the US, Asian Americans constitute 25%. International students constitute 15%. In other words, we Asians as a whole count as 40% of students. This is the case of Princeton. So, isn't 40% high enough? Given that Asians represent 40% of admitted students, those of us who say that college admissions is difficult are wrong. In addition to Asian Americans and international students, some Asians might fall under the category of multiracial students in the case that one of their parents is Asian and the other is of a different ethnicity. Multiracial students make up 7% of admitted students. The percentage for these students is similar to the percentage for African Americans and Hispanics. While we may say that the percentage for Asians has decreased, this is not the case at all. We constitute a greater percentage than any other ethnic group, and therefore such a complaint is not appropriate. So you might be led to ask, why do we Asians all get rejected? I'll answer this question through 4 perspectives. The first perspective is that of holistic review. Within holistic review, there is an important part called academic excellence. What we need to know consists of 2 parts, academic excellence and intellectual vitality. So here's the reason why we need to examine academic excellence before discussing holistic review. In some ways, American college admissions is really easy. This is because the colleges provide us with a formula or the requirements that they're looking for in their applicants. First, when they examine your academics, they'll look at your transcript. You must pay attention here to reflect upon what you have been doing. Many Asian students do not take their schoolwork seriously, but accumulate awards outside of school, study for SATs outside of school, take college-level courses outside of school, and go to summer camp outside of school. This is at odds with the fact that the first requirement for American college admissions is the rigor of the classes an applicant is taking in school, as reported in their transcripts. Remember this part. If your child is preparing for competitions, but neglecting their school classes, they're moving away from the criteria emphasized by the colleges. This is what Stanford has said. While holistic review can take diverse forms, what Stanford is telling us is that related to academic excellence, we will first examine your transcript and determine how do you challenge yourself, or in other words, rigor. So this is the time to examine how you're applying yourself to your studies. Are you a student who is applying themselves in school or outside of school? In order to evaluate your intellectual ability and level, the colleges will first be examining your transcript. This is reflected in the Common App as well. Just 10 years ago, the Common App only asked for classes a student planned to take in 12th grade. But from a few years back, the Common App has been asking, what classes did you take in 9th grade? What level were those classes at? What grades did you receive? What classes did you take in 10th grade? At what level and what grades did you receive? In 11th grade, what classes did you take? At what level and what grades did you receive? In 12th grade, what classes did you take? At what level and what grades did you receive? Now applicants must report these aspects very closely. When we examine these trends, we'll be able to see that there isn't a new change in college admissions practices, but rather a direction consistent with how the colleges have decreed that they will evaluate students in the past. Here's the most important takeaway regarding holistic review. Around 3 months ago, with UNC and Harvard, affirmative action was declared unconstitutional. What is really interesting is that even if affirmative action is gone, colleges are instructed to look at a student's background, a student's life experience, and evaluate them. The Supreme Court hasn't created a new policy. One part of the holistic review is background. The court is saying that separately from academic achievement, colleges should examine a student's background and life experience. They're saying that rather than academics, they're interested in how you've grown up independently of academics. Here, Hispanic students will talk about their Hispanic background, and African Americans will talk about their African American background. Naturally, they'll ask us Asians, what is your story? Understandably, the colleges, including Harvard, have included this question in their supplemental essays. Until this change, there was only one question asking, how are you different from other applicants? About 30 years ago, this was the question Harvard asked its applicants. Now, after about 30 years, Harvard has removed this question and, as one of their 5 essay prompts, added a question about background and life experience. What we have to keep in mind is that holistic review, in addition to background and life experience, examines academic excellence and intellectual contribution. Let's examine this more closely. Intellectual contribution. Let me give an example. Let's say that a student prepared for the Olympiad. While this demonstrates a certain level of intellectual ability, has the student made any academic contributions through this activity? Let's say that the student won an award at the competition. This demonstrates the student's potential and academic achievement, but does it show that students' intellectual contribution, interest, meaningfulness? If we examine college admissions, we will notice something that many people overlook. When examining holistic review, the colleges emphasize whole person, how he or she would grow. Blended meritocracy is not a sudden change, but one that, given existing trends, we might expect. We might say that rather than constituting a change, the Supreme Court decision simply confirmed existing trends. The primary idea I want to emphasize today is that the fact that those with perfect scores are rejected by the colleges stems from this consideration. There are always two sides to students' academics. One is academic achievement, and the other is intellectual contribution. These aspects apply to those with perfect SAT scores, those with perfect GPAs, and those who have won many awards. Let's examine what the colleges have said about these considerations. They have said, this is not the only criteria. We are curious about other aspects, and we'll use the essay to learn about those other aspects. Given that the colleges have clearly stated their views thus, it is surprising that we are so shocked that those with perfect scores have been rejected. It's quite simple. 75% of those with 1600 on the SAT and those with perfect GPAs have been rejected because even though applicants may have demonstrated and fulfilled the criteria of academic achievement, they have yet to show intellectual contribution. Furthermore, the colleges are saying they'll use an applicant's essay to determine whether the student has demonstrated intellectual contribution. Given these considerations, I don't know why we're so fixated upon scores. Those who are fixated on scores should note, we have to evaluate an applicant's academic ability in two ways. While we may fulfill the first criteria, academic achievement, we have not demonstrated the second criteria, which is the applicant's intellectual curiosity and contribution. This explains why those with perfect scores are rejected by the American colleges. If we go a step further and examine the holistic review process, we can understand this phenomenon even more fully and learn what we must do to gain admission. Here's what you need to prepare for the colleges. First, the colleges say they're curious about your background. There are essays on this. They're curious about your abilities and how you're making contributions to your community using these abilities. There are also essays on this. They're curious about your way of viewing the world. There are also essays on this. In evaluating applicants, the colleges will consider these criteria equally, and through them determine what kind of person the applicant is holistically, the potential that the applicant possesses, and how they'll contribute to society. Let's say that an applicant has perfect scores, a 1600 on the SATs, and a 4.0 GPA. We don't know the applicant's overall personality. We don't know the applicant's potential. We don't know how the applicant will contribute to Stanford. Can you now better understand the perspective of the colleges? When explaining why applicants with perfect scores have been rejected, people say it's the end of meritocracy. But in truth, meritocracy hasn't ended. This is a rude awakening for us, an opportunity to examine ourselves more closely. We should realize that the ways in which we're preparing for college admissions is very misled. In a way, parents take their experience, particularly their educational experience in Korea, and insist that if their child has the best grades in the school, if they achieve a perfect score in the college admissions exam, they will go to a good college. Given that the parents have this misled perspective, their child is at a disadvantage. So let's examine holistic review. First of all, academic excellence. For those students who do well on standardized tests, have a high GPA, and do well in their studies, colleges will examine their high scores as only one part of their application. Their high scores are a reflection of their diligence, not aptitude. Students with good grades are simply diligent students. Sometimes parents say, my child has a perfect GPA. My child has perfect SAT scores. My child is a genius. So children are simply diligent, not geniuses. There's no school that will take such kids and call them geniuses. Why do people tend to be so attached to perfect scores? So what is interesting is that in a child's college application, their parents' educational history must be included, along with their professions. What I've noticed is that those parents who obsess over scores were not educated at prestigious institutions. This includes Seoul National University, Korea University, and Yonsei University, those schools that are the most prestigious in Korea. If you look around, those people who excel at their studies do not brag about their grades. This is because they know that their success doesn't depend on grades alone. Academic excellence plays only a small part in the holistic review process. Here, we again fail. What the colleges have decreed they will focus on is the rigor of the classes evident in an academic and an applicant's transcript. What is important is how you've challenged yourself, and rather than taking only easy classes, how diligently you're applying yourself to your studies. We're talking about transcripts again. Through the transcript, the colleges will look at your scores, but more than that, they'll evaluate how much you've challenged yourself. The colleges are referring to rigor. Let's examine this more carefully. The classes you take in 9th grade, the classes you take in 10th grade, the classes you take in 11th grade, and the classes you take in 12th grade must increase in difficulty. In other words, you must take AP classes. Consider the case of this international school in Korea that has a record of being very successful in American college admissions. The school doesn't let students take AP classes in 9th grade. In 10th grade, they can take just one AP class. Then, depending on the student's grades and ability, they can take 2, 3, or 4 AP classes in 11th grade. In 12th grade, they can take 3, 4, or 5 AP classes. There is clearly an increase in difficulty as students progress through grade levels. In contrast, there are some Korean high schools that were successful with American college admissions in the past, but are not doing well in the present. The students at those schools take 7 AP classes in 9th grade, 7 AP classes in 10th grade, 8 AP classes in 11th grade, and 2 AP classes in 12th grade. So the difficulty of the classes increases with grade levels, then abruptly drops off. So you should examine your transcripts and get a sense of the balance with your AP and honors classes and how the difficulty of the classes increases as you move up grade levels. This is what the colleges declared they would evaluate, so it's important that you satisfy this criteria. Moving on, what the colleges are looking for is a balanced set of rigorous classes in the fields that high school curriculums typically cover: English, math, science, social studies, and foreign languages. The colleges have declared we do not examine solely whether the applicant has a high GPA. We do not examine solely whether an applicant's AP classes increase in number as they progress through grade levels. We are looking for students whose transcripts demonstrate a balanced set of rigorous classes in different fields, including English, science, math, social studies, and foreign language. So let's examine the situation. Of those of you watching this webinar, there may be students who take very many AP classes in science and math. You probably believe it's sufficient to focus solely on math and science. While you may have satisfied the college's expectations regarding math and science, there are other fields in which they have said applicants should demonstrate rigor. This includes the social sciences, which many Korean students try to cover by taking AP Economics and AP Psychology, but for which the foundational classes are AP US History, AP World History, and AP Government and Politics. Are you taking those classes? Or are you simply taking AP Macro and Microeconomics, AP Psychology, AP Human Geography, or AP Environmental Science? Or are you ignoring the importance of taking social studies classes and simply taking AP Art History? You have failed to satisfy the criteria that the colleges repeatedly emphasize. So we should further examine, are you taking foreign language classes? No. Are you taking rigorous classes related to English? You're likely not taking English language and literature because you say it's too difficult. The colleges have declared that in their search for balanced knowledge, they will examine applicants' classes in 5 areas. However, rather than pursuing the college's criteria, most students concentrate on maintaining good grades for English and math and in unimportant AP classes, and do not take courses in foreign languages. It is expected then that regardless of having a 4.0 GPA or a perfect score in the SATs or ACTs, if a student doesn't demonstrate a balanced set of rigorous classes, they will be rejected. The criteria of academic knowledge goes further than simply numerical scores. When the colleges examine your transcript, they're concerned with rigor or the level of difficulty. The colleges say that a balanced set of rigorous classes, English, science, math, social studies, and foreign languages, demonstrate an applicant's intellectual ability and potential, but we do not follow their recommendation. We avoid classes where getting an A is difficult, citing that the teacher is a harsh grader. We use the excuse that the teacher is bad and do not take AP classes. And then we study for the AP test outside of school and take the exam. Then we tell ourselves that since I received a 5 on the AP exam, I'm okay. If you think this way, you are very misled. Given that the colleges are looking for rigor and balance in our transcripts, it is no surprise that we have been rejected. In addition to this, in our academics, the colleges are looking for intellectual vitality. This is the aspect that should be demonstrated on a student's essays, their curiosity and their passion. One of the hardest aspects of working with students is answering the question, why are you studying this? What is your passion? The students don't have anything to say. This is problematic because what the colleges want is depth of commitment, which is evident in how much time the student spent for the activity. The colleges want to know, in order to demonstrate your passion, have you pursued and experienced diverse activities? This can be examined in 3 ways. First is curiosity and passion. Second, how much time you have spent for the activity. Third, to what extent have you pursued diverse activities related to this interest? Let's say a student is occupied with studying for exams, preparing for an Olympiad, being active in the Olympiad Club, participating in the robotics club, and publishing a research paper. They also have won a number of awards. What is the student curious about? And let's say the student has demonstrated curiosity. How much effort did the student put into their activities? While it is true that the student worked hard to prepare for exams, the colleges would ask, how have you pursued diverse activities in order to develop and satisfy your intellectual curiosity? Have you sought to embrace diverse perspectives in the process of exploring your intellectual curiosities? Students are unable to answer these questions. As you can see, the colleges are not emphasizing scores, but curiosity and depth and breadth. Korean students have trouble with these aspects. They have difficulty demonstrating curiosity. They have trouble demonstrating a diverse range of activities. They publish a research paper and attend a summer camp. They get an internship through utilizing DATS connections. This is not enough to satisfy the diversity that the colleges are looking for. So it is not surprising that these students are rejected by the colleges. We are long to believe that meritocracy has ended. Instead, what is the case is that from the beginning, meritocracy was not the college's policy. It may have seemed that students with high scores are accepted, but students with low scores are also accepted. Students with perfect scores are not necessarily at an advantage. Students who are at the top of their high school class are not necessarily at an advantage. This is the case because, as we have examined, intellectual ability is demonstrated through the rigor of the students' in-school classes, or the difficulty of the classes in the 5 areas we probably previously touched upon. And when this criteria is upheld, how much the students develop their intellectual curiosity through a diverse range of activities. Because they're not satisfying these criteria, 70%, 80% of students with SAT scores of 1600 and 70%, 80% of students with perfect GPAs are rejected. Scores are an important consideration in the college admissions process. According to the data for UPenn we examined before, the median 50% had a 34 to 35 on the ACTs and 1550 on the ACTs. More than 90% of accepted students have higher than 33 on the ACTs and 1550 on the SATs. So scores are an important criterion. But it is important to keep in mind that scores are just the baseline. It is not a criteria through which the colleges can access an applicant's intellectual ability. Intellectual ability is evaluated through the difficulty of classes, evident in a student's transcript, balanced knowledge in the 5 academic areas we discussed, and very importantly, how the student has explored and developed their intellectual curiosity through diverse routes. In other words, are you making an effort to explore your curiosities? And will you continue to make an effort to explore those interests? This criteria is the aspect that is the most important element in American college admissions, and whether a student is accepted or rejected depends on this criteria. In conclusion, many students do not satisfy this criteria, but on the other hand, there is a minority of students who do satisfy this requirement. Of the students who do not satisfy this criteria, many are fixated on the idea of meritocracy and concentrate only on scores. But what is demanded in American college admissions is not scores. Scores are just the baseline. The colleges are looking for intellectual vitality, or how through an applicant's intellectual curiosity, they have demonstrated intellectual ability. There are some students who do come as far as to fulfill these criteria. If you feel it's too difficult for you to satisfy these criteria, then decide quickly. If coming just this far is too difficult, you should give up the dream of attending Ivy Leagues and give up trying to attend the top 15 schools. Because at these top schools, the criteria we've discussed is the most basic of the basic. So let's say you're overwhelmed with obtaining the highest grades in your classes, with preparing for the SATs. Don't turn yourself into 75% or 80% that was rejected. Instead of burning yourself out to pursue admissions at the top schools, take things a bit more easy and aim for the top 20 or top 30 schools. Keep in mind that this amount of preparation doesn't determine whether you'll be accepted or rejected. Keep in mind that everyone makes it this far. If you want to rise above the competition, pay attention to these next points. We're looking at Harvard. What are the criteria they're using to evaluate applicants? They're examining factors other than academics, including community service, leadership, distinction in extracurricular activities, by which they mean a lot more than simply being the captain, and personal qualities and character. Alongside academics, these criteria must be satisfied. So when presented with this information, we might wonder, where should I start and how should I create my narrative? These are the most important aspects in American college admissions. I'm going to take some time to examine an important element, context. In the dictionary, it is defined as the situation in which everything happens. Let's take a look at an applicant. They're Asian American or International Asian. So in terms of context, this applicant is Asian. This is something we cannot change. If both their mother and father are Korean, but the applicant says they're white, this applicant has a problem. If they say they're Black, they also have a problem. In terms of race, we cannot change who we are. What about gender? Just 5 years ago, being female was advantageous for college admissions, as there were initiatives such as STEM for women, science for women, sports for women. But for Asian applicants, applicants are not evaluated differently for being an Asian male or being an Asian female. Most of the Korean students aiming for American colleges are upper middle class. They attend international school and they do not have to worry about where their next meal is coming from. Even if they apply for FAFSA, they have parents and no financial difficulties. If they have difficulty paying tuition, then they can sell their apartment, but they do not sell their apartment. In other words, even if they have money, they're refusing to spend it. So in terms of finances, being an Asian is not advantageous. Everyone is very similar. They're all doing the same activities. They're all opting to not to take classes in English, history, and foreign language. They all want to pursue STEM. They all want to become a lawyer or pursue biochem or psychology or business. They are all the same. We need to become aware of these trends. Students who live in this context, who compete in this context, need to distinguish themselves from other applicants in this context. If you are aware of your environment and aware of your competitors, this becomes very easy. Let me give you 2 examples. First, tutoring or mentoring. Mentoring is a very common activity. However, for 99% of students in their resumes, mentoring is less than 5 hours a week. If students persist in being involved with mentoring, they're making themselves same as the 99% of applicants. If you want to distinguish yourself, 1, spend 20 hours a week for the activity. That'll be sure to distinguish you. This demonstrates depth of experience. Before, I mentioned that there is both depth and breadth of experience. So by pursuing breadth of experience, you're rising above the competition. Many students participate in Model UN competitions. More than 90% of students are fixated on just attending as many competitions as possible. So then by winning in a lot of competitions, can you distinguish yourself? No, an activity that often stems from Model UN is tutoring. The student-created teaching materials. 90% of students write about this in their essays. Writing about this in their essays implies they don't have any competition, which isn't the case. Another activity that many students pursue these days is debate. What is problematic is that over 90% of the students focus on only participating in debate competitions and winning awards. One thing to keep in mind is if you attended US Nationals and won 3rd place, this is a bit of a different story. Before we say that while both depth and breadth are important, the colleges are looking for exceptional achievement in extracurriculars. If when compared to other applicants, you have exceptional achievements, the colleges will take that into consideration. Therefore, achievements have to be at the level of being a national representative if you want to distinguish yourself. Not a state representative or a city representative, but a national representative. In terms of context, there are not many students who can say they're a national representative. There are lots of state representatives, so it's difficult to distinguish yourself through that qualification. However, as a national representative acknowledged by the country, you can easily distinguish yourself. Now, let's take a look at papers. 90% of students write 1 to 2 papers. 1 to 2 papers is not sufficient to be admitted to the colleges. Amongst very hardworking and diligent students, you may see those who have up to 7 published papers in high school. Let's take a look at internships. Most students have engaged in at least 1 internship. The good thing about internships is that it's easy to distinguish yourself from the crowd. Most internships are unpaid internships, not paid internships. So let's say that you're paid $1,000 a month from your internship. Having a paid internship allows you to stand out from the rest. The takeaway is that in terms of what activities you're engaging in terms of the criteria that goes beyond your scores, your narrative, the context you are in, is very important. Because many people don't consider context, they become the same as everyone else in the crowd. Let's examine extracurricular activities. As I mentioned before, exceptional depth is important. The elements that are important include depth, achievement, and time spent. To determine depth, you have to spend around 10 to 20 hours a week and 12 to 15 weeks a year. You should pursue one or two activities to this depth. When we examine this criteria, we will see which students succeed and which fail. What we need to keep in mind is, through this activity, what kind of impact have you had on your community and other people? The colleges will be examining the scale of your impact. Pursuing 7 to 8 activities for 2 to 3 hours each has no impact. Students say they're a leader because they have engaged in these activities, but they do not meet the standard for American college admissions, which emphasizes exceptional depth or how much time you have spent for the activity and what impact you have had on other people in your community. Keep this in mind. You need to examine where your activities are focused and whether they have enough depth to distinguish you above the other applicants. In other words, are you devoting enough time to these activities? Are you pursuing 1 to 2 activities for at least 15 hours a week and 12 to 15 weeks a year? And with these activities, what is the most important, your position or the influence you had on other people's lives? Please remember that the colleges are interested in the latter. Then, let's say that you have come as far to satisfy these requirements. You've demonstrated academic rigor, demonstrated depth in your extracurriculars, and made an impact on the lives of others. It is true that it's difficult to come this far, but this is not it. There is still further to go. According to American colleges, the element that is most lacking in Asians is desirable personality traits. Their applications do not demonstrate personality at all, and not just simply personality, but personality that is manifested in leadership, service, solving problems in your community, putting yourself in others' shoes. But with Asians, they're concerned with their list of awards, their positions within their organizations, being a founder, fulfilling the minimum number of hours they need to be involved, to be distinguished in their activities, but not with the criteria that the colleges are looking for. I'm not saying these elements are all bad, but they're the most basic of the basic. The colleges have repeatedly told Asians that the most basic of the basic elements they look for in a candidate, personality traits, creativity, self-expression, are not demonstrated by us. So later, when you have been rejected from the colleges, if you ask the colleges what you're lacking in your application, they'll say in terms of your transcript, you've demonstrated academic excellence, but that you don't demonstrate desirable personality traits. In other words, we lack charisma. While we have good scores, we lack the kind of charisma sought after by the American colleges, found in commitment to serving and sacrificing oneself for others, creativity, cultural awareness, and daring. We do not demonstrate these qualities, so we are rejected. So, in other words, we don't have a story or a narrative. So for those watching this presentation, what is your story? Are you a student who studies very hard? That is a boring story. The fact that they only concentrate on academics suggests that the student lacks abilities in other activities. Are you a student who scores high? So what? They do not demonstrate curiosity. Are you a president of an organization? So what? Are you committing the 15 hours a week to the activity that the colleges look for in a student application? No. Why? Because you need to spend that time studying. What else do the colleges look for? A service mentality towards others in your community, regardless of what position you may hold. You don't fulfill this criteria as you're solely concerned with being the founder. Have you contributed to your community? No, as you are more concerned with accumulating awards. Because of such reasons, you don't have a story. While I cannot help those students who have already submitted their college applications, for the students who have yet to submit their applications, word of advice regarding the kind of story you should have. First, after the end of affirmative action in the main essay, a student should write about the background that has shaped their lives, one of the most important aspects of their application. Previously, we talked about context. All colleges are interested in this. What kind of environment did you grow up in, and how has it shaped you and led you to have the character and value system you possess today? And given that story, how should we expect that you, as an individual, would contribute to our community? This is the background essay that we previously discussed. The key narrative for the background essay is your unique background, the reason why context is so important. Second, what are also needed are community impact projects. UPenn has provided helpful data. 92% of accepted applicants have contributed to their community through diverse, unique projects and wrote about them in their essays. This shows that one of your narratives should focus upon how you benefited your community and that it is critical to tell the story as part of your application. Third, while diversity has been de-emphasized recently, there are a lot of college essays that ask you what is the perspective through which you view the world. In other words, when you have debates with other people, how do you respond? How do you interact with those who are different from you? What is the worldview that you possess? This is the perspective essay. This is also one of the narratives we need, which we can materialize through our activities. Let's consider the leadership essay. It seems very straightforward. While we Asians think about leadership, we gravitate toward positions. What the colleges will examine is how much time you spend for the activity. Leadership has to be demonstrated first through time commitment. Let's say you have at 7 to 8 leadership positions. Give up those positions, resign, and devote the time you gain to just 2 to 3 activities. Good leadership requires at least 10 to 15 hours a week. As mentioned previously, those students who are accepted by the colleges do not involve themselves in many activities at a superficial level, but concentrate on a smaller number of activities. We call these spike activities. Through these spike activities, we seek pursuits that will showcase your unique perspective and differentiate you from other applicants. But the colleges will ask, how much time have you spent for the activity and what were your responsibilities and what were your contributions? When I say contributions, I'm not referring to general responsibilities or responsibilities that were conferred on you because of your title, but rather the unique and distinct responsibilities that you took on and how through those responsibilities you contributed to your community. These are the elements that American colleges evaluate when they examine leadership and the elements that are essential to your narrative. So I really like the saying, a comfort zone is a beautiful place, but nothing ever grows there. The routines and repetition that you dwell within are beautiful, but nothing ever grows there. Examine how you're educating your children right now. You might simply not know the right direction. You might be following the direction suggested by your past personal experiences. You might be simply following what the other kids are doing. When your children bring home awards or score high on a test, you might feel that your experience is beautiful. You're misled. American college admissions is very straightforward. You just have to make sure you become successful in the areas that used to be your weaknesses. You have to take the areas in which you were successful and excel even further in them. You have to engage in new activities you had not previously pursued. End of story. What I find to be meaningful in the process, I can devote myself to selflessly, and I can devote more hours towards it. Today, we begin the presentation with the theme, End of Meritocracy. Scores are still important, but they're not everything. While we examine intellectual ability and intellectual vitality, we talked about intellectual curiosity. We talked about what narrative you must have in order to go to a top college. We talked about what happens when you don't have a narrative, but have perfect scores, rejection. The only thing you have is perfect scores and you don't have a story or demonstrate academic vitality, rejection. Or let's say you have had perfect scores and intellectual vitality, but you don't have a narrative, rejection. Or let's say you have perfect scores, vitality, and just leadership positions, rejection. Finally, let's say that you have perfect scores, vitality, but lack any activities to which you devote 10 to 15 hours a week, rejection. If you pay attention to the facts that have been shared by American colleges, the college admissions process is very straightforward. They are very clear as to what they're looking for in their applicants. So now it's your turn to decide. Or as we discussed, it's a matter of context. I hope today was an opportunity to think about what story you'll create given the Asian context you are in. If you need any assistance creating your narrative or need assistance with any other aspect I presented today, please feel free to get in touch with the DIAIPREP. Thank you very much.